Log entry 1742. Team lead Liam Carter. The call came in just as the October sky was beginning to bruise, that specific shade of purple-gray that promises a cold, damp night in the Cascades. Dispatch was patched through from the county sheriff. A couple of hikers, day trippers who'd pushed their luck on the Iron Goat Trail, reported it. They were already back at their car, spooked and shivering, talking about a sound they couldn't shake. A child's cry, they said. Faint, drifting on the wind, coming from somewhere deep within the embrace of the empty Baker-Snoqualmie National Forest. There's a unique kind of silence that falls over the SAR station when a call like that comes in. It's not the absence of noise, it's the absence of bullshit. The usual banter dies, the half-eaten sandwiches are abandoned, the air thickens with a shared, unspoken gravity. A lost hiker is one thing. A lost child is a weight on your soul before you've even zipped up your jacket. My team, Ecominus 7, was on rotation. Maya checked the primary medical kit, her movements precise and economical, her dark ponytail swinging like a pendulum. She's our medic and tracker, the one who sees the broken twig you or I would walk past 100 times. Ben was already loading the heavy gear into the truck, ropes, Stokes basket, thermal imager. He's the youngest, built like a lumberjack, and he carries the physical burden of our work without complaint, his quiet energy a steadying presence. And me, I was at the map table, the harsh fluorescent lights of the station glinting off the plastic overlay. My name is Liam Carter. I've been doing this for 15 years, and the lines around my eyes are a testament to every soul we've brought home, and the few we haven't. The hiker's report was vague. Somewhere north of the old Wellington avalanche site, they'd said. It sounded lonely. That was the word they used, lonely. It stuck with me. A child's cry isn't just a sound, it's a narrative of fear and desperation. And lonely added a layer of haunting poetry to it that I didn't like. Weather's turning, Liam, Maya said, her voice pulling me from the map. Drizzle by 19 o'clock, turning to steady rain by midnight. Temperatures dropping to 4 degrees Celsius. Acknowledged, I said, folding the map. Let's move. We've got a 2-hour window of usable light, tops. We find a place to park the truck as close to the coordinates as we can get, and we go in on foot. Full gear, headlamps on before we leave the vehicle. The drive up the pass was a race against the sun. The sky bled out, the peaks of the Cascades turning into sharp, black silhouettes against a fading orange glow. We didn't talk much. We each had our own rituals. I replayed the procedures in my head, running through search patterns, communication protocols, contingency plans. Ben methodically cleaned his multi-tool, a nervous habit. Maya stared out the window, her gaze fixed on the dense, dark wall of Douglas firs and hemlocks that lined the highway, as if she could already see the path we'd have to take. We left the truck near a washed-out service road, the air instantly colder, smelling of wet earth and pine needles. The forest here is ancient, primal. The trees are titans, their canopies so thick they create a premature twilight on the forest floor, even in the middle of the day. Moss hangs from every branch like an old man's beard, and the ground is a soft, treacherous carpet of decaying leaves and ferns. It's a place that swallows sound, which made the idea of a child's cry carrying all the way to the trail even more unnerving. Okay, Ecominus 7, comms check, I said into my radio, my voice feeling small against the vastness. Read you, Liam, Maya's voice crackled back. Loud and clear, Ben added. All right, standard sweep formation. 10 meters apart, eyes and ears open. We call out every 15 minutes. No sign of the child, we call out their name. Dispatch didn't have one, so we'll use little one. It's less jarring than kid or child. Let's move. We pushed into the woods, headlamps cutting sharp, white cones through the deepening gloom. The ground was uneven, a mess of exposed roots and slick rocks. Every snapped twig under my boots sounded like a gunshot in the heavy silence. For the first 20 minutes, there was nothing but the sound of our own breathing and the rustle of our gear. Doubt began to creep in, a familiar but unwelcome companion on these searches. Was it the wind, an animal? A cougar kitten's cry can sound eerily human. Then we heard it. It was faint, so faint I thought I'd imagined it. A high-pitched, wavering sound that hung in the air for a moment and then vanished. We all froze simultaneously. I raised a hand, signaling for silence. We stood motionless, straining to listen past the blood pounding in our ears. It came again, a little clearer this time. A sob, a desperate, heartbroken little sob that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't an animal, it was human. It was a child. The procedural calm I'd wrapped myself in shattered. This was real. Every parental instinct I didn't even know I had screamed to life. Maya's face was pale in the glow of her headlamp, her eyes wide. Ben had his hand on the handle of his axe, not as a weapon, but as if grounding himself. "Direction?" I whispered into the radio, my voice hoarse. "Northeast, I think," Maya whispered back. "It's hard to tell. The sound is bouncing off the trees." She was right. The acoustics of the dense, wet forest were playing tricks on us. We moved forward faster now, a new urgency in our steps. We were no longer just a search team, we were on a rescue mission. "Little one," I called out, my voice swallowed by the woods. "Can you hear me? We're here to help." Only the drip of water from the leaves answered. We continued for another 10 minutes, the terrain growing steeper, forcing us to navigate a shallow ravine. The drizzle Maya had predicted began, cold and persistent, clinging to our faces and making the rocks gleam slickly under our lights. The crying came and went, a phantom sound that was always just ahead, always just out of reach. Frustration was building, a hot, metallic taste in the back of my throat. How could we be so close and still so far? It was Maya who saw it. She stopped dead, holding up a hand. Her headlamp beam was fixed on a thick branch of a cedar tree, about chest-high. "Liam, look." I moved to her side, Ben flanking us. There, tied around the branch with a neat, perfect bow, was a small strip of pink satin ribbon. It was clean, dry, and starkly out of place in this world of green and brown decay. It looked like it had been tied there only moments ago. There was no footprint, no scuff mark, no other sign of passage. Just this silent, impossible ribbon. As we all stared at it, the crying started again. This time, it sounded chillingly close, as if the child was standing just beyond the reach of our lights, watching us. The forest held its breath, the only sound the steady drumming of rain on the hoods of our jackets. Maya held the pink ribbon between her thumb and forefinger, as if it were a fragile piece of evidence from a crime scene, which I suppose it was. The fabric was a shocking slash of manufactured color against the deep, wet greens and browns of the wilderness. "It's dry," she said, her voice a low murmur that barely carried over the rain. She turned it over. "Or it was. It hasn't been out here long, and look at this knot." Ben leaned in, his headlamp beam joining mine and Maya's, creating a small, intense bubble of light. He pointed a gloved finger at the simple but perfectly executed loop holding the ribbon to the branch. "It's a taut line hitch, a good one, not something a panicked kid would tie. And it's clean," I added, my own thoughts solidifying. "There's no mud, no fraying. It's like someone walked out here 10 minutes ago and tied it on." My gaze swept the impenetrable darkness surrounding us. The feeling of being watched, a primal instinct that's hard to shake in these woods, prickled the back of my neck. We were the searchers, but for a moment, I felt like we were the ones being observed. Then, as if on cue, the sound returned. A soft, desperate sob carried on the wind. This time, it felt closer, more distinct. It came from deeper in the woods, down a game trail that slicked with mud and disappeared into a thicket of devil's club and dripping ferns. "There," Maya whispered, her head snapping in the direction of the sound. The tracker in her took over, the momentary unease replaced by sharp focus. "Due west, maybe 200 yards. It's pulling us in," Ben grunted, adjusting the pack on his shoulders. He was a man of logistics and facts, and this situation was defying both. "Liam, the acoustics out here are a mess with this rain and the valley's shape. It could be echoing." "I know," I said, making a decision, "but it's the only lead we have. We follow the sound." The ribbon was a question with no answer, but the crying was a demand we couldn't ignore. We moved out with Maya taking point, her steps careful and precise on the slick ground. The rain, which had been a persistent drizzle, began to fall harder, heavier. It hammered against us, turning the trail into a shallow, muddy stream. Every step was a calculation of risk, the ground threatening to give way beneath our boots. The terrain sloped downwards sharply. What was a game trail moments ago devolved into a steep, treacherous embankment of mud and loose rock, ending in the roar of a fast-moving creek at the bottom. The water, swollen and brown with runoff, was a churning obstacle. "Creek's too high to wade safely," I called out over the noise of the water and the rain. "We need to find a crossing or rig a line." Just as I said it, the sobbing started again. But this time, it was different. It wasn't from ahead of us. It was from the other side of the roaring creek. A thin, desperate wail that seemed to slice right through the storm's fury. It was the sound of a child who was cold, scared, and very, very close. "Damn it," Ben cursed, his voice tight with frustration. "It's on the other side. We have to cross." Adrenaline surged through me. We were close. I could feel it. "Maya, scout for a deadfall, something we can use as a bridge. Ben, prep the ropes just in case." We worked with the synchronized efficiency of a team that had faced dozens of bad situations together. Maya moved downstream, her light dancing through the trees, while Ben uncoiled a throw bag, his movements swift and sure. The rain was relentless, soaking through the seams of my waterproof gear, a chilling cold seeping into my bones. "Got something?" Maya yelled. About 30 yards down, a massive fir tree had fallen across the creek, its trunk spanning the churning water like a primitive bridge. It was slick with moss and rain, a dangerous but viable option. We made our way over to it carefully. "Okay, one at a time," I commanded, my voice loud and clear. "Maintain 3 points of contact. I'll go first to check stability." I swung my pack to my front for better balance and stepped onto the log. It was wider than it looked, but incredibly slippery. I moved slowly, shuffling my feet, my poles clicking on the wet bark, my eyes fixed on the other side. The roar of the water below was deafening. Halfway across, I gave the thumbs up. Maya followed, then Ben. We regrouped on the far bank, soaked and breathing heavily, the smell of wet earth and pine filling the air. We stood there for a moment, listening. Silence. The crying had stopped. "Where?" Maya asked, her voice strained. She scanned the darkness, her headlamp beam cutting a frantic arc. "It was right here." "Echo," Ben said, shaking his head. "It had to be an echo from up the ridge." The sound bounced off the opposite bank, made it seem like it was over here. He sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as us. My heart sank. He was right. It was a classic auditory illusion, one we'd been warned about in training, but was still maddening to experience. We just risked a dangerous crossing for nothing. The frustration was a physical weight. We were chasing a ghost, and then we heard it again. Faint, distant, coming from the direction we had just come from, back across the creek. "No," Maya breathed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "No, that's not possible." A tense silence fell over our team, broken only by the rain and the creek. The psychological toll of the search was beginning to show. The hope that had surged moments before now felt like a cruel joke. "It's playing with us," she whispered, looking at me, her eyes wide in the light of my headlamp. "Whatever this is, it's the wind, Maya." "The terrain," I said, trying to inject a dose of logic into a situation that had none. "We're tired, we're cold. Let's just take a minute, reassess." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. This felt different, deliberate. I swept my light in a slow, wide arc, searching for anything. A footprint, a broken branch, another splash of color. My beam traced the line of the trees, glinting off the millions of raindrops clinging to the pine needles. Then it caught something else. A tiny, metallic glint. I focused my light on it. There, hanging from the low-hanging branch of a young cedar, was a small, silver bell. It was tied to the branch with a piece of simple twine, using the exact same taut line hitch as the pink ribbon. It was polished, immaculate, showing no signs of weather or wear. It swayed slightly in the wind but made no sound. I reached out and touched it. It was cold, real. This wasn't a lost item. A pink ribbon could be an accident. A silver bell, tied with the same knot, in a location we were seemingly led to, was not. It was a marker. A message. We stood there, the three of us, staring at the bell in the pouring rain. The crying had ceased. The forest was utterly silent except for the storm. We had 2 clues now, and we were no closer to finding a child. In fact, for the first time, a sliver of doubt entered my mind. Were we even looking for a child at all? The tiny silver bell hung perfectly still in the beam of Ben's headlamp, a single, perfect droplet of rain clinging to its underside. The sound of the creek was a constant roar behind them, but in our small circle of light, a fragile silence had fallen, heavier than the waterlogged air. It was broken by Ben letting out a low, guttural curse. "This is bull," he seethed, turning to face me, his face a mask of frustration under the brim of his hood. "Ribbons, bells. This isn't a lost kid, Liam. This is a game we're being played." Maya flinched at his tone. She hadn't taken her eyes off the bell, her own light trembling slightly. "Ben, stop," she whispered. Her voice was strained. "What if the child is being forced to do this? What if they're bait?" "Bait for what?" Ben shot back, his voice rising over the creek's noise. "For us, 3 SAR members in the middle of a storm, what's the endgame? This is a waste of time and a massive risk. We just made a dangerous crossing for nothing. The sound is back over there now. We're being led in circles." He jabbed a thumb back towards the churning water. He was right. I could hear it too, the faint, phantom sobbing, now seeming to emanate from the very spot we had just risked our necks to leave. The auditory illusion was so perfect, so cruel, it felt like a personal insult. Every instinct I had, honed over a decade of searches, was screaming that this was wrong. Standard procedure had no chapter for this. "Both of you, calm down," I said, forcing a command I didn't feel into my voice. "Ben, your point is valid. Maya, so is yours. We can't rule anything out." I stepped closer to the bell, careful not to disturb the branch. I leaned in, studying the knot. It was identical to the one on the ribbon. A perfect tight clove hitch, not a child's clumsy tie. Not a frantic parent's knot. Deliberate, precise, cold. My radio crackled. "Ecominus 7, this is command. Status update, over." I keyed the mic, my thumb hesitating for a fraction of a second. What could I even report? "Command, we're following a ghost cry and finding arts and crafts projects." "Command, this is Ecominus 7 lead. We are continuing the search. Conditions are deteriorating, but we have found signs that suggest a continued presence in the area. We'll advise further, over." "Copy that, Ecominus 7, be safe. Command out." The lie, or rather the massive omission, sat like a stone in my gut. But explaining this situation over the radio would invite 100 questions I couldn't answer and might lead to a premature order to pull out. If Maya was right, if there was even a 1% chance a child was at the center of this, pulling out wasn't an option yet. "All right," I said, turning back to my team. "New plan. We're no longer just following the sound. We're hunting. Ben, I want you looking for anything out of place. Tracks, broken twigs, scuff marks, anything that isn't from an animal. Maya, keep your ears open, but your eyes open wider. We're looking for the person leaving these. We move slow. We move quiet. We assume this is a hostile situation until proven otherwise. Lights on low beam only. We stick within 10 feet of each other. No exceptions. Understood?" Ben nodded, the anger on his face replaced by a focused, grim resolve. This he understood. A tangible threat was easier to process than a phantom. Maya gave a small, jerky nod, pulling her hood further down as if to shield herself from more than just the rain. The emotional toll was hitting her the hardest, but her professionalism was unwavering. We left the bell where it hung, a silent sentinel in the oppressive dark. We began to move, not towards the sound, but parallel to the creek, sweeping the area in a tight formation. The forest felt different now. Every shadow seemed to stretch. Every drip of water from a fern sounded like a footstep. The wind moaned through the high canopy, carrying with it the intermittent, heartbreaking sobs that we were now trying to ignore. It was a maddening exercise in discipline, forcing ourselves to disregard the very sound that brought us here. For nearly an hour, we found nothing but mud, rock, and rain. The cold was seeping into my bones, a deep, wearying chill. Frustration began to creep back in, gnawing at the edges of my focus. Maybe Ben was right. Maybe this was just a twisted game designed to exhaust us and send us home. Then, my light caught it. It was perched on a flat, moss-covered boulder, placed just off the barely there game trail we were following. It was positioned so perfectly, it looked like an exhibit in a museum. A single child's sneaker. It looked like a size 9 or 10, white with bright blue laces. And just like the ribbon, just like the bell, it was impossibly, unnervingly clean. Not a speck of mud marred its white rubber sole. Not a drop of rain seemed to have soaked its canvas. It just sat there, pristine, an island of innocence in a world of muck and decay. I stopped dead, raising a hand to halt the others. Ben came up beside me, his light joining mine on the shoe. He said nothing, but I heard his sharp intake of breath. Maya came up on my other side, and a soft, choked gasp escaped her lips. This was different. The ribbon was an object. The bell was an object. This belonged to someone. You could picture a small foot inside it, a child running through a park on a sunny day. It was personal. It was a violation. I knelt, the wet ground soaking through the knee of my pants. I didn't touch it. I just looked. The blue laces were tied in a perfect double knot. The fabric was dry. It couldn't have been here for more than a few minutes, placed delicately between downpours. The person we were hunting was close, watching us. As if on cue, the crying started again. But this time, it wasn't a distant, ethereal sound. It was close. So close it sounded like it was coming from the thicket of ferns just 20 yards ahead of us. It was no longer a faint sob. It was a desperate, terrified wail, the kind of cry that bypasses the ears and rips straight at your heart. Maya visibly recoiled, her hand flying to her mouth. Ben instinctively reached for the handle of the small hatchet on his pack, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the rock. My own heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was the moment the game changed. This was no longer a search. It felt like a confrontation was imminent. "Command," I whispered into my radio, my voice hoarse. "This is Liam. We have a developing situation here. I need you to listen." The cry wasn't just close, it was visceral. A raw, ragged sound that tore through the rain-soaked air from a dense thicket of salmonberry bushes just 20 yards ahead. It was the sound of a child in real, immediate distress. Instinct screamed at them to run, to crash through the undergrowth and provide aid. Training held them back. Liam's hand shot up, a fist signaling hold. He dropped to one knee, the pristine sneaker still illuminated in his headlamp beam, a stark white beacon in the deepening gloom. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady roar of the rain. Maya Ben spread out 5-meter intervals. Slow approach. Watch your footing, watch our flanks. His voice was low, cutting through the wind, stripped of all emotion except a cold, hard focus. Ben nodded grimly, his face a mask of tension. He unclipped the ice axe from his pack, holding it low and ready. It wasn't standard procedure for a search, but this was no longer a standard search. Maya moved to Liam's left, her movements fluid and silent despite the sucking mud. Her eyes weren't on the thicket. They were scanning the trees, the deep shadows, the spaces in between. They were all thinking the same thing. The cry was the bait, the thicket was the kill zone. Every snapped twig, every drip of water from a saturated fern sounded like a footstep. The crying continued, a desperate, looped plea of "Mommy, help me," that grated on their nerves, designed to shatter discipline. They moved inch by agonizing inch, the beams of their headlamps slicing through the downpour, catching the silver glint of rain on leaves. The smell of wet earth and decaying pine needles was thick in the air, cloying and heavy. Liam reached the edge of the thorny bushes first. He held his position, listening. The sound was deafening now, originating from somewhere deep inside the tangle of branches. It didn't move. It didn't change pitch or volume. It was just playing. He signaled for Maya and Ben to hold, then carefully, using the handle of his trekking pole, he began to part the branches. Water cascaded down, soaking his gloves. He peered into the small clearing within the thicket. There was no child, no struggling figure. There was only a hollowed-out section at the base of an old-growth cedar, sheltered from the worst of the rain. And nestled inside, almost invisible against the dark wood, was a small, black, waterproof speaker. A blinking blue light pulsed on its side like a malevolent heartbeat. "Son of a bitch," Ben breathed, the words barely audible over the recorded sobs. He had moved up beside Liam, his eyes wide with a mixture of vindication and pure, unadulterated rage. Liam reached in and jabbed the power button. Silence. The sudden absence of the crying was more jarring than the sound itself. The forest seemed to hold its breath. All that was left was the drumming of the rain on their hoods and the pounding in their ears. Maya knelt, her expression one of profound disgust. To use a child's voice to fake that kind of pain, she trailed off, shaking her head. "What kind of person does this?" "The kind we're hunting," Liam said, his voice like flint. He carefully placed the speaker into an evidence bag he pulled from his vest. It was a rugged, off-the-shelf model, but it was their first piece of hard evidence. He looked at Ben. "You were right." Ben just shook his head, his knuckles white where he gripped his axe. "I wish I wasn't, man. I really wish I wasn't." "The tracks," Maya said suddenly. Her focus had shifted from the speaker to the ground around the cedar. She pointed her light at a small patch of mud, partially protected by an overhanging root. "Liam, look." There, preserved with chilling clarity, was a single, deep boot print. It wasn't a standard hiking boot. The tread was aggressive, military style, with a distinct triangular pattern on the heel. It was fresh. The edges were sharp, not yet softened by the relentless rain. Whoever left it had been standing right here, setting up their cruel theater not long ago. "They're heading east," Maya said, her voice regaining its professional edge. She was a tracker again, the emotional shock giving way to the cold calculus of the hunt. Deeper into the park, away from the trail. Liam stared at the print. This changed everything. It was no longer a vague suspicion. It was a confirmed, hostile presence. He pulled his radio from his chest harness. "Ecominus 7 to command, come in." The reply was immediate, crackling through the static. "Go for command, Ecominus 7. What's your status?" Liam took a breath, choosing his words with surgical precision. He had to convey the gravity without sounding like he'd lost his mind. "Command, be advised, the search subject is a code black. I repeat, code black. We have not located a child. The auditory reports are the result of a recording played on a device we have now secured. We have evidence of a third party deliberately luring rescue personnel into the forest. We have a fresh track. Suspect is on foot, moving east from our position. We are transitioning from SAR to pursuit. How copy?" There was a long pause on the other end, long enough for Liam to picture the dispatcher, Frank, leaning forward in his chair, rereading the protocol for a code black, a hostile, non-search-related event. It was a code they rarely, if ever, used. "Ecominus 7 copy that," Frank's voice returned, strained with confusion. "Confirm you are stating there is no missing child?" "That is affirmative, Command. This is a deliberate trap. The ribbon, the bell, the shoe, they were all placed. We are now tracking the individual responsible." Another pause. "Understood, Ecominus 7. Stand by for instructions from Sheriff's Department. Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. Report suspect's direction of travel and maintain a safe distance." "We can't just let them go, Frank," Liam said, his voice low and urgent. "This person brought us miles off trail into a storm. They're dangerous. We're the only ones close enough to keep a tail." "Copy that, Liam." Frank's voice was softer now, understanding the unspoken implication. "Just be careful. State police have been notified. ETA is unknown with this weather. You're on your own for now." "Understood, Command. Ecominus 7 out." Liam clipped the radio back onto his harness. He looked at his team. The rain plastered their hair to their faces, their expressions grim and resolute in the cold glow of their lamps. The unsettling mystery had been solved, but in its place was a far more terrifying reality. They were no longer rescuers. They were prey that had decided to hunt back. "All right," Liam said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Maya, you take point on the track. Ben, you've got our 6. Keep your eyes open. We move silent, we move smart. We find out who's playing games with us." Code Black confirmed command. "Repeat, this is Ecominus 7. We have a Code Black." Liam's voice was a low, steady anchor against the rising howl of the wind. The static-laced acknowledgement from the other end was barely audible, but it was enough. The mission parameters were rewritten in that single phrase. They were no longer rescuers. They were hunters. Maya was already on her knees, her gloved fingers hovering just inches from the boot print. The rain, now a persistent, heavy drizzle, beaded on her yellow rain slicker. She ignored it, her focus absolute. "It's a tactical boot, but not standard military issue." "High-end," she murmured, her voice a mix of professional assessment and quiet fury. "Tread pattern is aggressive, designed for this kind of terrain. See the wear on the outer heel? He has a slight supination when he walks. Puts more weight on the outside of his foot." She pointed a finger at the depth of the impression. "I'd estimate he's around 200 pounds, maybe a bit more with gear. He's heavy on his feet, but he's trying not to be." "Can you track it?" Liam asked, his gaze sweeping the oppressive wall of green and brown surrounding them. Maya nodded, her eyes already scanning the ground ahead. "He's good, but he's moving fast, and this rain is a problem. It's a race, Liam. We lose this track, we lose him." "Then we move fast," Liam ordered. The shift in their dynamic was immediate. Maya took the lead, her posture low, a predator on a scent. Ben fell back to cover their 6, his rifle held in a low-ready position, its black frame a stark contrast to the vibrant, dying greens of the undergrowth. Liam moved between them, the team's nerve center, his senses stretched to their absolute limit. The forest had transformed. Before, it was a neutral obstacle, a challenge to be overcome. Now, it felt complicit, its shadows deeper, its sounds more menacing. Every gust of wind through the firs sounded like a whisper, every falling branch like a footstep. They moved for what felt like an eternity, the only sounds being the squelch of their boots in the mud and Maya's occasional, clipped directions. "Scuff mark on that route, he slipped here. Broken fern frond, still weeping, we're close." The manipulator knew they were following, he had to, and he was toying with them. An hour into the chase, Maya held up a fist and the team froze. She pointed toward a thick hemlock tree. Tied around its trunk about chest-high was a length of bright orange paracord. It was knotted with a perfect figure-8 follow-through, the foundational knot for any climber or rescuer, a knot they had all tied thousands of times. Ben let out a low curse. "That's our cord. Same issue we carry." It was a message, as clear as if it had been written out and posted for them. "I know who you are, I know what you do. I can do it too." The implication was chilling. This wasn't some random lunatic. This was someone with knowledge, with training. Liam felt a cold dread mix with his anger. They were chasing a dark reflection of themselves. As if on cue, the heavens opened up. The steady drizzle became a torrential downpour. Water cascaded through the canopy, turning the forest floor into a churning soup of mud and pine needles. "I'm losing it," Maya shouted over the roar of the rain. "The tracks are washing out." Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up Liam's throat. He shoved it down. "Subtler signs, Maya, look for anything. Displaced rocks, mud on the tree trunks. He has to be touching things." Her focus narrowed again, her frustration a visible tension in her shoulders. She pushed on, moving more by instinct than by sight, her hands brushing against bark, her eyes scanning for any anomaly in the chaos of the storm. The wind ripped at them, throwing water in their faces and making the trees around them groan like dying giants. This was no longer tracking. It was a desperate, primal pursuit. Just as Liam was beginning to think they had lost him for good, Maya stopped dead. She stood motionless for a second, her head tilted. "Do you smell that?" Liam took a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of rain and wet earth. But underneath it, faint and almost imperceptible, was another smell. Wood smoke, acrid and fresh. Ben had his rifle up, sweeping the area ahead. Liam gave him a series of hand signals, fan out, cautious approach. They moved like ghosts through the downpour, placing each foot with painstaking care. The smell grew stronger, guiding them toward a small, natural clearing sheltered by a cluster of ancient Douglas firs. In the center was a small ring of stones, blackened by fire. A few embers still glowed faintly, hissing as the heavy raindrops struck them. A discarded foil MRE pouch for Chili Mac lay half-buried in the mud next to the fire ring. "Damn it," Ben whispered, his voice tight with frustration. He knelt and touched the stones, snatching his hand back. Still warm. He was here not 5 minutes ago. He must have heard us coming. The camp was Spartan, efficient. The work of someone who knew how to survive out here and travel light. He had been sitting here, eating, waiting for them. Liam's eyes scanned every inch of the clearing, looking for what they'd missed for the next part of the game. And then Maya made a small, choked sound. "Liam!" She was staring at one of the massive firs at the edge of the clearing. Tucked into a crevice in the thick, gnarled bark, protected from the worst of the rain by a natural overhang, was a small plastic sandwich bag. Inside, something white gleamed. Liam approached cautiously, his heart pounding a heavy rhythm against his ribs. He used the tip of his knife to pry the baggie out of the bark. It was a photograph. He turned it over. His breath caught in his chest. It was a picture of the three of them, Maya, Ben, and himself. It had been taken from a distance, with a telephoto lens, capturing them mid-stride as they crossed the swollen creek earlier that day. They looked exhausted, soaked, their faces grim with determination. They looked vulnerable. It was a hunter's trophy shot. He slowly flipped the photograph over. Scrawled on the back in thick, black permanent marker was a single word: closer. The world seemed to shrink to the size of the Polaroid in Liam's hand. The rain, the wind, the biting cold, it all faded into a dull background hum. He stared at the image of his own team, captured just hours ago. Ben checking his pack straps, Maya pointing at a map, himself looking up towards the ridge. The angle was from above, slightly to their left. He'd been there, close enough to see the exhaustion on their faces. Closer. The word on the back felt like it was branded into his palm. "Son of a bitch," Ben spat, his voice a low growl that was barely audible over the storm. He wasn't looking at the photo. He was scanning the oppressive wall of trees surrounding them, his hand resting on the handle of the emergency flare gun at his hip as if it were a sidearm. He was right here, watching us like rats in his maze. Maya was silent, her usual calm replaced by a chilling stillness. She took the photograph from Liam, her eyes tracing the edges, analyzing the grain, the focus, the handwriting. She was a tracker, and this was a different kind of trail, a psychological one. "The ink is still fresh," she said, her voice steady but laced with ice. "It hasn't bled from the rain. He wrote this minutes ago." The implication hung heavy in the air. The man they were hunting was not just ahead of them. He was shadowing them, circling them, enjoying the chase from the front row seats. "That's it," Ben declared, throwing his hands up in exasperation. "I'm done with this. We're not chasing a ghost in a hurricane, Liam. He knows this forest better than we do. He wants us to keep pushing, tired, wet, and angry. He's leading us into a deadfall or over a cliff. We need to find a defensible spot, set up a perimeter, and wait for this storm to break. We call for backup and let a tactical team handle this. And be a sitting target?" Maya countered instantly, turning on him. Her eyes, usually so composed, flashed with fierce intensity. "He got close enough to take a picture, Ben. If we stop, we're just making his job easier. He can observe us, wait for us to let our guard down. The trail is already half gone. Every minute we wait here, he disappears. Our best defense is offense. We keep the pressure on." "Pressure? He's the one pressuring us," Ben shot back, his voice rising. "He's holding all the cards." "Enough!" Liam's voice cut through the argument like a blade. Both Ben and Maya fell silent, turning to him. The rain dripped from the brim of his hood, tracing lines down his weathered face. He looked from Ben's frayed nerves to Maya's resolute fury, then back down at the mocking photograph. He felt the cold knot of fear in his own stomach, but he couldn't let it rule him. He was the leader. He had to find the third way. He crumpled the photograph in his fist. "You're both right," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. "He wants us to chase blindly, and he wants us to be afraid. We're not going to do either." He looked at Maya. "But you're right, we can't stop. We can't give him time to vanish." He then turned to Ben. "And you're right that just following is suicide, so we're changing the game." A new, hard light entered his eyes. "He's been hunting us. Now we hunt him." He knelt, pulling the rest of the team down with him under the relative shelter of a massive cedar. "He's arrogant. Taking that photo, leaving it for us, that's not just a taunt, it's a mistake. It tells us he's overconfident. He'll expect us to find it and either panic or charge forward recklessly. He'll probably double back to watch." Liam laid out the plan quickly, his words precise and clear. They would pack up camp, making it look like they were continuing the pursuit along the main trail. They would leave obvious tracks for the first 100 yards. Then, they would use the swollen creek bed to hide their trail, doubling back downstream for half a click. From there, they would climb the eastern ridge, get ahead of their own trail, and set an ambush at a natural choke point he remembered from the map. They would use his arrogance against him. The shift in purpose was palpable. The fear was still there, but now it was forged into a weapon. They worked with grim efficiency, breaking down the makeshift camp. As Ben went to stow his comms unit, he stopped. He stared down at his pack, his face paling. "Liam," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Liam and Maya were at his side in a second. Ben pointed to his pack's side pouch. A neat, deliberate slice ran across the waterproof fabric. Inside, the slot for his spare radio battery was empty. Nothing else was gone. Not the food, not the first aid, just a single battery. It was a useless act of sabotage on its own. They still had their primary radios and Maya's spare, but its message was deafening. He had been in their camp. While they slept, he had opened their packs, touched their gear. The violation was more profound than the photograph. He wasn't just watching from a distance. He had been within arm's reach. Without a word, they finished packing, the silence now thick with a new, more personal dread. They executed Liam's plan with military precision. They laid the false trail, then slipped into the churning, muddy water of the creek, the icy current soaking them to the bone, but washing their presence from the earth. They moved through the forest like wraiths, their shared expertise a silent language of hand signals and knowing glances. An hour later, they were in position. The spot was perfect, a narrow game trail forced between a sheer rock face and a steep, slick drop-off into a ravine. Anyone following their original path would have to pass through this bottleneck. Liam took a position high on the rocks, giving him an overwatch view. Maya concealed herself in a dense thicket of ferns just off the trail, while Ben took cover behind a fallen log on the opposite side. They were invisible, 3 points of a triangle ready to close. And then they waited. The rain softened to a persistent drizzle, the wind moaning through the high branches. Every drip of water, every rustle of a leaf sounded like an approaching footstep. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. The cold seeped deep into their bones. Doubt began to creep in. Had he seen them? Had they miscalculated? Then, a flicker of movement down the trail. A shape dark against the gray mist. It moved with an unnerving confidence, not sneaking, but walking with a steady, rhythmic pace. It was a tall figure in dark rain gear, head down against the weather. He was heading directly towards them. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs. He held up a closed fist, the signal to hold. The figure drew closer, 20 yards, 15. He was walking right into the center of their trap. Liam could see the man's military-style boots now, the same ones that had left the prints. This was him. He slowly lowered his fist, preparing to give the signal to engage. The forest held its breath. The man stood perfectly still in the center of the narrow gorge, a dark silhouette against the bruised purple twilight. His head was cocked, a predator sensing a shift in the air. He hadn't seen the tripwire, but his instincts were screaming. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden silence. It was now or never. He keyed his radio twice, the 2 short, sharp clicks barely audible over the dripping leaves. It was the only signal Ben needed. From his concealed position behind a moss-covered boulder, he yanked hard on the main rope. With a sound like a giant's gasp, a weighted cargo net, meticulously woven with branches and wet leaves, erupted from the forest floor. It flew upwards and then descended, enveloping the man in its heavy mesh. He roared, a sound of pure fury, not surprise. He didn't panic. He immediately dropped to a knee, using the lower center of gravity to fight the net's pull, his hand clawing for the large knife sheathed on his tactical belt. He was too slow. Maya was already a phantom in motion, emerging from the deep shadows of the firs to his right. She moved with the fluid grace of a hunter, her steps silent on the muddy ground. As his fingers closed around the handle of his knife, she struck. Her hand clamped down on his wrist, thumb digging into the nerve cluster with practiced, painful precision. His grip broke, and the knife thudded softly into the muck. At the same moment, Liam burst from his cover, closing the distance in 3 long strides. He didn't throw a punch. He drove his shoulder hard into the man's chest, using his full body weight to slam him backward. The air rushed out of the man's lungs, and they hit the ground together in a tangled heap of limbs and netting, the impact a wet, grunting slap. Ben was on them instantly, his powerful frame adding to the pressure, pinning the man's legs. The fight was messy, desperate, and utterly without glory. It was a straining, breathless struggle in the mud and rain, a contest of leverage and exhaustion. The man was incredibly strong, bucking and twisting, his face contorted in a mask of primal rage. He was fighting not like a cornered man, but like a trainer disappointed in his pupils. On the ground, "Stay down," Liam yelled, his voice raw as he struggled to get a zip tie around one of the man's flailing wrists. Finally, with Maya applying a restraining hold and Ben's weight crushing his resistance, the man's energy gave out. He went limp, his chest heaving, his breath coming in ragged, angry gasps. Rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead. For the first time, Liam got a clear look at his face. The features were sharp, intelligent, and twisted with a familiar bitterness. A cold knot of recognition tightened in Liam's stomach. "Jacobs," Liam breathed, the name tasting like rust. "Daniel Jacobs?" The man spat a wad of mud and grass to the side, a smirk crawling across his lips. "Took you long enough, Carter. I was starting to think you'd forgotten me." Daniel Jacobs, a candidate from 2 years ago. Brilliant in the field, strong, technically proficient. But he was also a lone wolf, arrogant and reckless, with a deep-seated contempt for protocol and teamwork. Liam had been the one to make the final call, writing the assessment that washed him out of the SAR program. Lacks the psychological stability and collaborative spirit essential for team operations. A liability in high-stress scenarios. "What is this, Jacobs?" Maya demanded, her voice tight with disgust as she cinched the final restraint. "The crying child, the clues. All this for what?" "A test," Jacobs snapped, his eyes locking onto Liam's. "You said I wasn't team material, that I was a liability, so I designed the ultimate test. A scenario you couldn't solve with your little rulebook. I wanted to see if the legendary Ecominus 7 was as good as they say, or just a pack of followers. You followed my ribbon, you followed my bell, you followed my sounds. I was in your camp, Liam. I touched your gear. I was watching you breathe while you slept, and you never knew." The confession hung in the air, more chilling than the cold rain. He hadn't intended to physically harm them. His goal was far more insidious. He wanted to dismantle them psychologically, to prove their system was flawed and that he, the outcast, was superior. "People were worried," Ben said, his voice a low rumble. "Resources were deployed. You created a panic." Jacobs laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "Panic sharpens the senses. I gave you a real-world problem. Not a lost hiker with a twisted ankle. I gave you a thinking enemy. I was trying to make you better, but you weren't hunting me, not until the end. You were just reacting." Liam looked at the man pinned beneath him, not a monster, just a man drowning in his own resentment. The meticulous knots, the knowledge of their tactics, the psychological warfare. It was all the bitter fruit of a rejected brilliance that had curdled into obsession. He pulled out his radio, his movements slow and deliberate. Ecominus 7 to base. Code Black is resolved. Suspect is in custody. We are at the gorge awaiting extraction. No injuries. The flight out was a blur of noise and vibration. Below, the MT. Baker Snoqualmie National Forest was a vast, dark sea of green, indifferent to the human drama that had played out within its depths. Jacobs was sedated and silent, handed over to sheriff's deputies who met the helicopter. No one from the team spoke. There were no words of triumph, no congratulations. The victory felt hollow, the resolution somber. As the chopper banked toward the lights of the city, Liam looked across the cabin at his team. Ben was leaning his head against the cold plexiglass, his eyes closed, the tension finally draining from his massive shoulders. Maya was methodically cleaning mud from her gear, her movements precise, a way of restoring order to the chaos. She caught his eye and gave a small, tired nod. It was a gesture of shared understanding that transcended words. They hadn't rescued a child from the wilderness. They had confronted a darkness born of rejection and ego. Jacobs had been right about one thing: he had tested them. He had tested their patience, their training, their resolve. But the one thing he had failed to understand, the one variable he could never account for, was the silent, unbreakable trust that bound them together. He had tried to prove they were just a collection of individuals following a map. He'd failed to see that their real strength wasn't in the ropes or the radios, but in the invisible lines that connected them, a net far stronger than the one he had laid. The ordeal was over, but the memory would remain. A stark reminder that the most dangerous terrain is sometimes the landscape of the human mind.